Hello, welcome to my podcast and to my YouTube channel. I have a special guest today, someone that I have been listening to for a few months. I've listened to interviews, podcasts, and I really wanted to have her here with us because I think she will add so much. You might be thinking, why talk about values related to suicide? And it sounds strange, but let me tell you, values are central to well living, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We see, I'm sure that Gina sees the same thing in her practice. Many of our patients will come to us, and then we dig in and we dig in, and what we find is that they're not living by their values, and that's bringing a lot of unhappiness, a lot of disease, a lot of symptoms. So this is what we're going to talk about today, and I'm very happy that you're here, Gina, let me just introduce you quickly. Jenna LeJeune, that's her name, and I'm going to have all your contacts, your website, everything on my notes. She's a clinical psychologist. She works here in Portland, Oregon. She's the co-founder and president of the Portland Psychotherapy Clinic Research and Training Center. And she's also the co-author of the book, Values in Therapy. So Gina, please help me help my audience to understand what values are, to help them just identify whether or not they're off track in terms of their values and their principles, what they believe in, and of course, how can they get back on track. So let's start with that. Welcome to my podcast, Gina. Thank you. I'm so happy you're here.
Oh, it's really nice to be here. I just really love having the opportunity to talk about values. And you bring up the point about, what do values have to do with suicide? I can't think of something more important than than values when it comes to somebody who is suffering so much that they're considering ending their life, because there's so much pain there that if the task is just how do we keep you alive, at least for me, that's not worth it. For me,
Mhm.
it is about how do we help you have a life that is worth living. And that's really what values are about. So I think you can't address the issue of suicide without talking about like what would make this pain worth it for you.
That's a great point because I do see that a lot, even in treatment, how to treat suicidal patients. Many times it's about keeping them alive. Yeah, but at what
Absolutely.
cost? Is it a
Mm.
meaningful life? So let's dig into it, Gina. Help us
Sure.
understand. Let's start with values. What are values? Because this is such a general word that it's in everybody's mouth. We talk about our values and principles and beliefs, but can you just clarify what values are?
Sure. And I guess I just want to start by saying I don't have the answer for this. This is not the only right way. This is just sort of my way of talking about values, and I talk about it from an acceptance and commitment therapy perspective. So, from that perspective, values are about ways of living that result in a sense of purpose or meaning or vitality. So they're really qualities of action. They aren't just like what you're doing, but they're how you're doing what you're doing. And so when I'm describing it to clients, I talk about things like, I'll say living a values-based life is being able to get to the end of your life and look back on it and say, now that was well lived. That's what we mean by values. So they're quite different than how that word is often used. Usually it's talked about like values and morals as being the same thing, or values and goals are usually talked about as the same thing. And from this perspective, those are quite different concepts.
Is it more related to principles and the things that are meaningful in your life? Is that it?
Absolutely. So they're the things that you choose to make important in your life. They're the things that you choose to kind of matter about. And typically, when we're living a life in line with the things that are important to us, it provides a sense of meaning and purpose to our life.
Hmm. And also, from what I understand, and I've heard you talk about this a few times, it's not just about, okay, let's say this is, I think, the first thing that a lot of people say, oh, what are your values? What's important to you? And they say family is important.
Right.
But okay, but how do you show up as a family member, right? So it
That's
has to do with
exactly
how
right.
you show up.
That's 100%. Yeah. And even among ACT therapists who do values work a lot, I find this idea that we talk about values. I use the term value domains. So we'll say things like, oh, I value family, or I value my health, or I value, education. Those are the arenas. Those are
Hmm.
the domains where we live out our life. But how do you show up to your family? How do you show up to your partner? How do you care well for your health? Those are sort of the qualities of action that I'm talking about when I talk about values.
Hmm. So let's say a client comes to you and say, well, what's important to me are relationships. My friends are important. So I would think that one question to ask is, when was the last time you talked to your friends? Or when was the last time that you actually put time aside to spend with your friends? Is that it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you can ask a question like, okay, when you are in your relationships and you're at your best self, what would I see you be doing? How would I describe you as you're in your relationships? And some of those descriptions might be some of the values words.
Hmm. You talked about moral, and sometimes we get those two mixed up. So what is the difference?
Yeah, in many ways, I really wish that we chose another word other than values, just because that word is so often used synonymously with morals. But morals from this perspective are you're learning about right and wrong. And typically that has come through external rules. And I'm a behaviorist, so I think about it in terms of consequences. So you have done something, you have gotten punished for it, and so you learn a rule that that is bad. Or you've done something and you've gotten reinforced for it, so you learn a rule that that is good. And those are morals. And I think morals are super important. I'm glad I live in a world that, where people have
Oh,
morals.
yes. Oh,
Yes.
so more important than ever right now.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I think we need a little more of that in our life. But it is different than values, because values aren't about right and wrong. They're about what you would freely choose to make important in your life. And that's a really important principle when it comes to values, is there isn't a sense of right or wrong. Like I might say, I would choose to interact with my partner in a generous and loving manner. Like maybe some of those are some of my values. Well, nobody's going to say, well, that's wrong. You should be choosing to interact with your partner in a like playful and spontaneous way. Like you sort of see, like, these aren't right and wrong. It's just, what would you choose in your life?
So less dogmatic as
Hmm.
well.
Less dogmatic and less externally oriented. Somebody hasn't told me that this is what's right or wrong.
Hmm. For me, what helps me understand what my values are, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think about it this way. So, what does it stir in you? Does it bring
Oh.
you joy? I'll give you an example.
Mm.
Yesterday, I was taking this class online. It's a technique in EMDR, and she said, think about something that makes you happy. I immediately thought about hugging my niece, because I haven't hugged her in months.
Oh,
And
me
I
either.
just melted. To me, that's
Ah.
values.
Oh my
That,
gosh. You are exactly right. As soon as you said that line about what stirs you or what gives you joy,
mm,
like that's what values are. It's hard to use words to say, well, a value is this or a value is that, but when you contact it, you sort of know. It's like, Oh, that's
Oh,
it.
that's it.
Uh-huh. Exactly. Exactly. And then we just try and put words around it because, we're verbal creatures and it's helpful to be able to use words. But when I'm working with people, I'm really trying to have them tap into how can you tell in your body? Like what's your experience where you're I use the metaphor of a truffle, like you're getting close to that values truffle. You're getting close to that, oh yeah, this is the stuff that makes life worth living.
Hmm. You mentioned that it's freely chosen.
Mhm.
Is that is that actually possible, Gina, today? Because we are impacted by culture, by our environment, by our friends, family. Can we really freely choose our values?
It's such a great question. And it really depends what hat I'm wearing. So if I have my scientist hat on and my little behaviorist hat on, of course we're not freely choosing. Of course we're influenced by culture and context and genetics and all of that stuff. But the point is that what we want is we want values to be experienced as freely chosen. So that the sense isn't, well, I choose these values because I know I should. Rather, I choose these values because if I were free to choose, this is what I would choose. And so, of course, we're very much influenced by context. Um, but what I want is I want to help my clients get to this place where they can notice a sense of choice as well.
It also gives them power back, doesn't it?
Absolutely right.
More
Absolutely.
control, but not
Yep.
in a negative way, but control in terms of responsibilities. It's like an existential control, right? You are responsible for your life.
That's exactly right. And with that, I also do want to acknowledge that context may also limit the ways that you can live out a particular value. Like in some, let's say you had a value around authenticity. And let's say you were a member of the LGBT community, but you were living in a context where that was dangerous or not okay to live fully in that identity. You might not, for safety reasons, be able to live authentically the way you would in some other context, but you could still choose to move towards authenticity given your context. And so that's also what we mean by freely chosen. Your context is going to limit how it's going to look, but it doesn't get to take away the possibility of you getting to live out your value.
And now that you were talking now, and I'm thinking, are they static, your values, or do they change over time?
I think it's a really good empirical question. People ask me this quite a lot, um, and empirically we don't know yet. What I can say is my own personal experience, just of myself and my clients, is in general, like, had you asked me as a 6-year-old if I could think about these things as a 6-year-old, like, I probably would have said things like, I like being generous and I like being kind. And those are still some of the values that really orient my life now. And so I think in general, I wouldn't say they were static. I think they grow and get richer and deeper. But in general, I think they provide a pretty consistent compass in our life. And that's one of the nice things about them is they can be this like North Star that you can kind of keep moving towards, especially in
Hmm.
darker times of your life.
That's where you go to in darker times, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
It's what keeps you
Yeah.
up, keeps you,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yep.
keeps you going.
Yep.
Can we help? I often try to help my audience, Gina, because I just I come from a place of okay, they don't go to therapy, so
Hmm.
I try to provide them with tools. How can they identify their values? Because I'm sure many of them are thinking of, so what are my values? So can
Sure.
you help them go through some kind of exercise that could help them find what
Sure.
their values are?
Sure. I'm happy to. And one thing I prefer thinking about this in terms of choosing our values rather than identifying them, only because identifying oftentimes for people, it can feel like I'm discovering it. And discovery doesn't have that quality of choice to it. It's like it's already there and I'm supposed to find the right one. And so
Good point.
I will often say with clients, like, let's go through a process of exploring and choosing what you might want to value or what you might choose to make important in your life. So if it's okay with you, can we use the example of you with your niece that you
Of
gave just
course,
a minute
yeah.
ago? Yeah. So if I were going, do you want me to do a little exercise with
I would
you?
love it. Yes.
Oh, great. Oh, great. So maybe if you can just close your eyes for a moment.
Okay.
Yeah, and just kind of let your breath find its own rhythm and cadence. And I want you to picture that imagined scene of you wrapping your arms around your niece. And you said you smelled her hair. And just see if you can feel what she feels like pressed up against you. And now, if it's possible, see if you can observe that scene from the outside. So here's Paola, and she's hugging this young girl. And just sort of notice, what's Paola like right now? If you were going to describe her, just sort of, you don't even have to respond, just kind of notice in your head, what are some of the qualities that she seems to be like? What are you drawn to about her? Or what do you like about her? What would you want to get to know more of about this wonderful auntie who is hugging her sweet niece? And what might this niece think of Paula? Like, how might she describe her aunt? Now you can kind of just go back into your breath again. And you can let that vision fade and open your eyes back up. So this is an exercise I do with clients a lot. It's called the sweet spot exercise, and it's just taking, I can even see emotion on your
I
face
know.
there. Yeah,
I am. I can't wait. And she's not
yeah.
even little. She's 20 years old.
That's all right. They're always little. They're
They're
always little.
always
I have a
little.
niece that's the same way. They're always my little Josephine. Yeah, when we can notice that we have these memories or these, even in a like fantasized version of these sweet moments. I mean, that's a very, very simple memory that you have. It's not some grand, it's not you taking
Mm-mm.
her to Disney World. It's like you're just hugging her. And then when you can kind of notice, what am I doing right now? What are the qualities that I'm embodying? That might help give you some sense of, oh, I want to be more like that.
Hmm. That's how I
So
want to show up.
exactly right. Exactly
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's great.
Hmm.
So they're doing this one of these exercises,
Hmm.
and they at least know where they're supposed to, or not supposed to go, but where they
Hmm.
would like to go, or they
Hmm.
would choose to go.
Hmm.
How can they explore their lives to see if they're going into this direction?
Oh, yeah, it's a really great question. So, like maybe if we just keep going with your example, if you don't mind, like, can you just name like what was a quality that you embodied in that scene? Like, what were you like?
Affection, a lot
Okay.
of love and
Okay.
affection.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice. Yeah. Yeah. So a couple of the values that you might want to guide your life is like you want to be affectionately loving. Something like that. You really like it when you bring that to your relationships and it feels like it has life to it. So one of the things that two directions. One is you can have the person if it's yourself or a client, you can say, okay, this week I'm going to intentionally practice what it's like being affectionately loving in my relationship and see the outcome. Do I like myself more? Does that feel like a richer, more vibrant interaction? So you can do some experiments with that. Or the other way is when you're feeling a lack of vitality or a flatness or a deadness, a lack of meaning, that's almost always a sign that you have moved away from your values. And so if you are in that place of pain, one thing you can do is say, okay, I know the things that I would choose to make important is to affection and lovingly connecting with my family. I'm going to intentionally do that right now, even though I feel this deadness inside of me. So it isn't about trying to produce a feeling. It's about trying to live the way you would choose to live, even in moments of pain. And then for most of us, when we're living a life that is like prioritizing the things that are important to us and ways of being we would be proud of, I mean, most of us do tend to feel better in our lives, but that's not the point. The point is to live well rather than feel good.
I'm glad you mentioned deadness
Mm.
because we live in a Western culture that says, let's all be happy. It's all about searching for happiness, right?
Yep,
We have
yep.
to be happy and life has to be glorious all the time. And social media doesn't help that. I know,
Mm-hmm.
we know that.
Yep.
But the thing is, we understand that as let's avoid pain.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about that, Gina, because that's so important. And the thing is,
Absolutely.
when you avoid pain, you avoid living. You avoid love. You avoid the other side of the coin,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. I mean, again, I go back to your example. The way that we contacted that sweet joy that was on your face when you were thinking about your niece was we started with the sadness and longing that you haven't been able to do that for months. If you cut yourself off from that pain and didn't allow yourself to like miss and care and have a sadness, then you don't get to have the value. It's like, imagine what it would take for you to not care that you haven't been able to hug your niece for months. All of those values, all of that love would have to be dead. And so pain and values are two sides of the same coin. You don't get to have one without the other. And often when we are pursuing a feeling of happiness, it is really about avoidance of pain. And so rather than happy, I mean, I like feeling happy. I love it when I feel
Who
happy.
doesn't, right?
I know, it's fantastic. Absolutely. And I'm fortunate in that, like, I'm somebody who temperamentally gets to feel happy a fair amount of the time. But when I get to the end of everything, like, here lies Jenna, she was really happy a lot of the time, doesn't feel like what I want on my tombstone. I think there's something richer and deeper. And for me, the word that I think about, the word that fits best is like meaning. Like, I want to live a meaningful life. And sometimes that comes along with a whole lot of pain, like
Mhm.
noticing that you don't get to hug your niece right now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It makes so much sense, doesn't it? Because we see that all the time in our patients. They come and no, but there's something wrong with me because I'm unhappy,
Well,
right?
and it makes sense because that's the story that they've been sold, right? They've been sold the story that there is something wrong with you. And the answer to your suffering is to try and get rid of it. Versus from this perspective, we would say the answer is how can you make room for whatever life has given you right now and live a life that is meaningful and rich and full.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that's just not the message that our typical mental health and regular cultural system gives people.
Mm-hmm. Jenna, what happens when we derail from our values? because I have, that's my impression, that they show what this shows up like is symptoms. It's disease, we call it depression, some
Mhm.
others will call it anxiety, whatever name you, way diagnosis you want to call it. But many times you can trace it back to derailing from your values. So how does it show up?
Yeah, I mean, I hope this doesn't sound too pessimistic. I've never actually said this like publicly before, but I actually think it shows up as sort of like it's kind of what normal living looks like for most people. Most of the time, I think our culture doesn't help us be intentional about living a meaningful and valued life. Our culture really reinforces like feeling good or being successful in particular ways. And so, yes, absolutely, when we get derailed from our values, it can look like psychological suffering in the form of depression or anxiety or suicidality. But it can also look like, the person that's looks like they have everything in their life and everything is supposedly going swimmingly and there's a hollowness there. And you may not be able to see it on their Instagram posts or their Facebook feeds.
Oh, you never see that there.
No, of
No.
course you don't. But they can feel that there's a hollowness there.
Hmm.
And the flip side of that, and why I really love values, is because it seems like it balances out our incredibly unjust world, is you can also see people in tremendous pain in very difficult circumstances, and they have a life and a purpose and a sense of meaning in their life that is so much richer than any of the trappings of the
Hmm.
person who seems to have everything. That's how you can kind of tell the difference between whether somebody is getting derailed from their values or not.
Hmm. Do you find that COVID, this pandemic, is going to have a positive impact in terms of self-reflection? Because at least people, they're alone now, they don't have as much distraction as they used to. So how do you see the impact of the pandemic on searching for your own, authenticity and living the
Mhm.
life you really want to live?
On my good days, yes, I I do. And I'm
I
a
know.
human being. I'm a human being like everybody else who's in this situation. And so, yes, there are bad days when I feel like, nope, we're just going to hell in a handbasket. But
Not
on my good days,
happening.
nope, not happening. And on my good days, and like how I would choose to be in this world, I really do think this is a painful time. And one of the benefits may be that it might force some of us to pause and notice what actually is meaningful in my life. When we have kind of our normal trappings of life stripped away, or we get pulled off of the treadmill that we've been on, it does sort of give us the opportunity to say, what might actually give me a sense of meaning or vitality or purpose in my life? And for many of the people that I'm working with and that I know in my life, the relationship piece is really becoming key to people, and they're really starting to question, oh wait, how do I want to be in my relationships? This is the source of richness in my life. How would I choose to spend my time and resources on that versus something else?
Yeah, I've been talking to friends about this, not just clients. And I often ask them, has it changed the way you see relationships?
Hmm.
Or has it made you, for example, be more selective with friends? And they always have a story to tell. Yeah, I have this friend who blah blah blah. So I think it is into relationships now. They have become the core of the discussion. I mean,
I think so too.
for the first time, we have headlines with loneliness, right, in
Yep.
them.
Exactly. Exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're social creatures. And so for many of us, the most important arena where we want to live out our values is in our relationships. That's where the most life is.
And that's where healing is,
I think
right?
so
We
too.
know that. We know
Yep.
that.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to end by asking one more question. Let's say, okay, now they're reflecting on these as well. This is what I need to. How can they go back?
Mm,
They were off rails, now back on track with their values. Because
absolutely.
I'm sure, first of all, it means you're going to have to make some hard choices. So, how can you help them understand, I mean, which path to take?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, I just want to normalize it, I wrote a book on this. This is what I spend my life doing. And I get off track in my values all the time. This
Mm-hmm.
is like a really normal
I'm
human
glad you
thing.
said that. It's normal.
It's
Yes, we're
very normal.
humans.
Yep. Humans evolutionarily are oriented towards avoidance. Don't get eaten by the lion in the Serengeti. We are
Yeah.
not oriented towards values. So I get off
No,
track all
it's
the time.
self-preservation first.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So if you find yourself getting off track, congratulations, you're a normal human being. And what I suggest to people is take the next smallest step. So from this perspective, values are always immediately available to us. You don't have to be someplace else. You don't have to do something before you can start living your values. They're always immediately available. Like right now, as I'm talking to you, one of the values that is really important to me in my communication is, or in my life, is kind of a warmth and what I think of as sort of like a generosity of heart. And there are times in this conversation when I've noticed like, oh, I'm valuing like, oh, I want to look smart or something like that. And I'll just like pull myself back to, oh, no, remember, you want to be this way, Jenna.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you find yourself getting off track, a very great question is, what's the next smallest step? And then what is the arena? What's the domain where I want to take that step? So maybe it's with your partner, maybe it's with your child, maybe it's with a parent or a friend. Do one thing that helps you be more of the person you want to be, and then take the next step after that. So
Mm-hmm.
that's one thing I would suggest. And the other thing is, I do recommend that people have periods of time where they do some intentional reflection on where they're at with their values. And so that might be once a year, you do like a little mini values retreat where you just spend a few days sort of reflecting on these things, or you can keep a values journal, or you and your partner can be having conversations about this on a regular basis. You can see a therapist. So I do think it is also important to kind of pause, just like if you were like out hiking, you pause and you check like, okay, where am I at? Like, is my compass still pointing north? And then you can keep going forward.
That was great. I love the small steps because
Oh,
we
yeah.
often think about, okay, I'm going to change my life immediately, everything at once, right? I'm going to be on track. I actually, you were talking, and I was thinking about a friend of mine. We were doing, getting a master's degree together, and you know how it is. We do a lot of role plays,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, client and therapist. And every time we had a role play, she would mention this friend, a friend's friend, right? She would mention this friend who did this to her, so that every single role play. And I remember one time she started saying, okay, before we start the role play, can I just tell you something? You really have to rethink this relationship with this friend. And she said, yeah, it's pretty obvious it's a friend, isn't it? Of course it is. It's all you talk about. And she said, well, but we've been friends for over 20 years. This doesn't mean it's a good friendship.
That's right. That's right. That's very funny. It's very funny. Yeah, sometimes big life changes are important. And sometimes the next thing to do is just the next smallest step.
Hmm. Thank you very much, Gina, for being with us. I'm sure this is going to be so helpful, and that's
Oh,
why I do this. I hope you listener have learned a lot, because I sure have. Have a good day. Stay safe.
thank you. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing for people who are really, really struggling. And I really hope that our conversation today could help help them sort of see like this is really about, could you create a life that would make the suffering worth it?
Yeah, I loved the way you started and now how you finished. Thank you.
So thank you.